Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com, with a special video presentation for you today, a book report of sorts, but not like the Film Literature in the New World Order podcast series I do on a monthly basis, where we examine books and movies for the various messages and propaganda they may or may not contain. But in this particular video, we're going to be reviewing a book that I wholeheartedly and unreservedly recommend to the readers, viewers, and listeners in the Corbett Report audience, and that book is The Lone Gladio by Sibel Edmonds. And please forgive me the disservice of not having a physical copy to display to you here. I only have an electronic review copy at the moment. My physical copy is still on the way. But with that disadvantage aside, I will do my best to present to you some of the reasons why I think it will be in your best interests to get and read this book. I think it's extremely important and extremely courageous and brave thing that Sibel has done in putting this book in print. So I think we need to support that act of bravery with the intestinal fortitude and every other type of fortitude that's required to stomach our way through what really is, I think, the belly of the beast that we often talk about and try to delineate here on the Corbett Report. So to get to the meat and potatoes, The Lone Gladio, obviously to understand what this novel is about, it would be good to have at least a general familiarity with the idea of Operation Gladio, which I'm sure much of my audience already does from some of the video presentations, the podcasts, the other things that I've done on the subject of Gladio. I'll include some links in the show notes for this video in case you haven't seen those presentations in the past, but the long story short is, according to the mainstream version of events, which has now been the mainstream version of events for nearly 2.5 decades, that back in the wake of the wake of Second World War, going into the Cold War era, the NATO powers coalesced in the late 1940s to try to form stay-behind paramilitary units that would survive in the event of some Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe or of Europe as a whole, and that would be able to stay behind and fight against the Soviet occupation. And so that was the idea for this operation that became much, much more complex and much more nuanced than that from the outset. And I think, obviously, as part of the design, it became much more than that. This, in the mainstream framing of it, was a NATO operation, and it was, again, in the mainstream way that it's framed, it's generally a European operation that's most closely associated with Italy, and this is perhaps because the name Gladio itself derives from the name for the specifically Italian branch of this stay-behind operation, which was Gladio, and then the entire program just gets known as Operation Gladio, and there you have it. So most people associate this with Italy and with some of the acts of terrorism that took place in the years of lead in Italy from the mid-1960s up until the 1980s. And of course culminating in the Bologna massacre, the killing of 85 and wounding of over 200 at the Bologna railway station in 1980. So that atrocious event and others have been linked to the stay-behind units that were started as a result of this NATO operation. It was a huge scandal, and I suppose continues to be so. It continues to be investigated by various parliamentary investigations and what have you, but I think that the big revelations that we saw, for example, in 1990, when the Italian Prime Minister got up and announced it in front of the entire house in Italy, is probably behind us. I don't think those types of revelations are going to be happening as a result of those types of political confessions anytime in the near future, unless, of course, it were to be spurred. But as I say, that's the mainstream understanding of Gladio, and it's very much in the past tense. It was something that happened during the Cold War, it was specifically aimed at the Soviet Union, etc. And if there's anything that we've learned in recent years, and I hope there is, it would be from my very important interview series with Sibel Edmonds that I conducted last year on Gladio B. I'll direct you to the playlist for all 5 videos in that series. An exceptionally important few hours of your time that I guarantee will be absolutely mind-blowing if you haven't seen it before, and if you can stick with it to put together the pieces of a puzzle that you have never been shown before, and many of the pieces of that puzzle you've never been shown before, so it can be quite confusing at first, but I guarantee you it is worth your investment of time to look at that interview series, where I call it an interview series. Really, it was a monologue by Sibel Edmonds. I just pressed the record button, and she spilled all sorts of information out on an unsuspecting public, and that information included details of how Ayman al-Zawahiri, of course Osama bin Laden's right-hand man and now the nominal leader of al-Qaeda, was meeting with U.S. State Department representatives and Gladio operatives in Azerbaijan in the late 1990s, how they were coordinating various acts in Central Asia and the Caucasus region together, how that's just the top, the tip of the iceberg in terms of the collusion that goes on with this Operation Gladio in its newfound form to acts of terrorism across that region, to drug running and money laundering operations, to Turkish paramilitary units that are now shifting over into Gladio B, Plan B of Gladio, which is now less focused on paramilitary and right-wing nationalist groups, and now focused on building up Islamic radicalist groups. And of course, the Islamic terrorist and Islamic radical threat that we now face is, according to the testimony of Sibel Edmonds and others who have examined Gladio, the work of the Gladio operatives. So an exceptionally, exceptionally important interview series. So much information. Please go there. But if you haven't seen that, and just to get a grip on what's going on, let's just take a short extract from a very informative interview that Sibel recently gave Lou Rockwell on the Lou Rockwell podcast, talking about the lone Gladio, in which she explained a little bit about how Gladio functions today in a very, very excellently titled interview. The government gagged her, but it didn't work.
Now, with the fall of the Soviet Union after 1991, we had the same situation, this time over former Soviet Union states, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and also the entire region, including Georgia. Who was going to control this? Well, we had the Chinese, with their billions of people and their dependence on energy. We have the semi-weakened Russians, and we had us. So between these three actors in the global chess game, each one had to do his or her own, its own best to take over and have the dominance of this region. The United States was in this position with NATO saying, how can we utilize the language that is on our side, the Turkic language and the Turkic heritage and Islam, to sway them and get them further from Russia and on our side, so that we can turn them into NATO members, put our military base there, and also to dominate their energy, the rich energy resources sector. Well, the plan that was conceived and put in place, which was the continuation of Operation Gladio, original Operation Gladio, was that we would use Islam and we would use language, and we continue the previous Operation Gladio tactics in order to sway these countries, bring them to our side, put them in our camp, put our military bases, etc., which we started doing. Starting in 1996, with the help of the United States, under United States direction, we helped open over 350 mosques in Azerbaijan and other countries in the region. We started putting together some of these NGOs for supposed development or education or human rights or feminism, whatever you want to call it, and we started putting our operatives on the ground in place in those countries.
So, as you see, the Gladio of old is no longer the Gladio of today. The current Gladio is very much focused on Central Asia and the Caucasus region, a very strategic and resource-rich area that is very much in play now that, of course, we are in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union, and that part of the chessboard is still up for grabs. And obviously there is a very concerted effort going on to make sure that that falls into the NATO side. And of course, that's what Gladio B is all about. So that is where we derive the name of this novel, The Lone Gladio. And that is not incidental to what this book is about. It really is the heart about what this book is about. Now, to say what this book is, as plainly as I can, I suppose if we had to categorize it, it would be a spy thriller. But if you read my written review of this book, you would know that that isn't exactly the best way to categorize it, because it goes above and beyond any spy thriller that you've read from Ludlow or Clancy or Le Carré or any of those types of writers. This is a spy thriller that goes right into the heart of real geopolitical reality that is really taking place in the real world today, and it really does connect. And as I say, it connects that Gladio B plan that's taking place right now with the real world in a very visceral way. I won't belittle the audience by actually giving a plot summary of the book. I think that that's always a bit tawdry for a book review. You can read the book yourself and follow along with the plot, but to, I guess, give the basics of the plot, the initiating event is a high-ranking congressman caught in child sex tourism in Cambodia, where he is being bugged and wiretapped not only by an intrepid American reporter, but also by a CIA team, which is blackmailing and surveilling members of Congress. And so that sets in motion a series of events that culminates in a Gladio operative being stung in a way that they weren't expecting, and he kind of goes rogue and starts acting against the system, and ends up cooperating with Elsie Simon, a plucky 5'3", 105-pound FBI translator in the Washington field office of the FBI. And this is a book written by a plucky 5'3"-ish, I guess, former translator in the Washington field office of the FBI. Make of that what you will. But so that's what this plot revolves around. But as I say again, what this book is doing, and what it is clearly doing, is putting into a fictional form. I mean, there are fictional elements that take place here, obviously, but putting into a fictional form some very real events that are going on, and trying to explain this Gladio B narrative to a lay audience, a point that I think Sibel laid out quite well in her recent interview with Guillermo Jimenez on Traces of Reality about this book.
Maybe perhaps obvious, but a very significant benefit to writing a fictional novel or working through fictional mediums is exactly that I think a whole new audience that has never heard of let alone Gladio B, that never heard of Operation Gladio period, are going to be introduced to it for the very first time. And that I think, I mean, you can answer this better, obviously, than I could, because you wrote it after all. But to me, as a reader who is at least somewhat familiar with these ideas and concepts, that felt to me like this was the true purpose of this book, was to introduce Gladio B to a larger audience that really needs to hear about this stuff. I mean, you can answer this yourself, but that to me is what it felt like at reading through this.
Absolutely, it is, and getting people's mind when the minds are far more open to ideas such as, and the notions. These are the real life notions, politically, geopolitically, of things, practices such as synthetic wars and synthetic terrorism, false flag operations. Yeah. These extremely important factual realities, these things that are happening before our eyes, but for one reason or another, people are just looking the other way, or they still resist accepting it, no matter what the evidence or no matter what the facts. And again, that was another thing that I was I'm still hoping that would achieve. We still don't really have a real answer to this Malaysian flight, MH17, and same thing with Syria and the supposed chemical attacks that took place, and who really did it. It became a context, the pretext, it provided that, what you want to publicly speaking.
The red line or whatever.
The feasible ground so that you get some support and you go and declare another war. And as we know, for the past few years, the synthetic wars have been, created around us nonstop. I mean, whether you're looking at Libya or Syria or what's going to happen with Iran and what's happening in Ukraine and what we're going to see happen in Georgia very soon, in Abkhazia and Georgia area, well, again, makes it very current and hopefully gets people to think about some of these events, current events, as they read it.
All right, so this really does connect very well with current events and things that are going on right now and things that will continue to go on unless and until we choose to wake up from our slumber and realize that these events are being crafted and puppeteered by these Gladio-type operations that are going on all the time. And let me tell you this from my perspective from reading this book. I know a lot of the information that this book is trying to convey. Not all of it, I would say, but a lot of the information that it's trying to convey from having obviously conducted those interviews with Sibel last year. But having said that, it is another thing entirely to read a narrative in narrative form, a story that puts these pieces together in a way that makes it hit home in a way that it hasn't for me in a very long time, just how real this is, how this is not a game, and this is not really anything to do with the types of arguments that I'm sure you and I and everyone else has with the people around us in regular everyday life, where you're just trying to get people to listen to any of this evidence. Oh, that's just conspiracy theory. No, it's not conspiracy. We've all had that type of argument, but beyond that, you know that there are people at levels much, much higher than mere President of the United States who are aware of the various things that are being done and puppeteered and engineered to bring about geopolitical realities that are much grander in scale than any minor foreign policy agenda that the State Department publicly declares, that are looking at those types of debates happily and rubbing their hands, because as long as we're caught up arguing with like that, I mean, to think about the reality of what's going on underneath this is again, it's very interesting to read it in narrative form. So allow me, if you will, to just read a couple of passages that I think are important, just to illustrate some of the things and topics and ideas that are being talked about here. First of all, we have this one, which is an observation from the rogue Gladio operative's perspective in this novel. He's reminiscing or pontificating to himself, and he thinks to himself, people believed, well, the ignorant masses believed in fairy tales, like reformed and restricted intelligence agencies, the supposed restrictions, FISA laws. These are dog and pony shows. Illusions are created to shield the system. Otherwise, things could get sticky. The CIA never for an instant ceased or restricted their operations within the United States. All they did was to implement new measures and procedures to decrease their chances of being exposed. Gregg was well aware that despite the official policy that twisted and abused the public trust, the agency had operatives at the topmost levels of decision-making within news agencies and media organizations, including print, digital, TV, and radio. These folks made sure that the elected players were under their control. All right, that's just one passage from the perspective, again, of one of these operatives who works at a very high level of this system, who knows of which he speaks. And that's part of the perspective that you get from this novel, that, again, when you see it narrativized like that and put into a series of events that flow realistically, logically, naturally from the way that the story is set up, it again is quite chilling, especially because this ultimately culminates in a confession extracted through torture, actually, and interestingly enough, from one of the perpetrators of the September 11th attacks. Not the September 11th attacks as in the 19 men with box cutters, but the September 11th attacks as in the real false flag reality behind those attacks, which are, again, according to this book, in the logic of this book, in the narrative, it wasn't hijackers. It was people who had been told that they were going to be, they were in a drill, that they were going to be rewarded for their work afterwards, etc. Something very much like has been posited many times by those conspiracy theorists in the alternative media. And so, again, these types of things put into this narrative form really do help to, I think, encapsulate these ideas in a way that just talking about facts and evidence for most people probably won't reach them. A novel form reaches people in a completely different way. And again, I wanted to share a different passage, if I can find it at the moment, which I probably can't. Yes, another, I think, key aspect of this is that it's not sentimental in any way, and it doesn't paint a rosy-eyed picture of the world. It does end with basically the dismantling of Gladio B from the outside in. The Gladio B is exposed and it's going to have to fold, but the implication is it's going to continue. It's just going to have to go underground in a different way, and it's maybe going to, some of the rats are going to be exposed and going to be captured as they flee the sinking ship, but others will undoubtedly cling to some piece of shrapnel for safety and float off to their next adventure. And I think the best summary of how these operations work is contained on page 258 of the book. What he told her about the company operation was true. Highly compartmentalized, distinct pockets, separated from one another by design. It was brilliant and the key to their enduring success. No matter how savvy or skilled, no one Gladio could ever unearth Gladio as a whole. It would be impossible. There are too many pieces of this puzzle scattered in too many different places, and too many people are guarding those secrets individually for them ever to all combine and expose the whole big picture. The best you can do is expose bits and pieces here and make sure you get the worst bits out, and before they have a chance to remetastasize like the cancer in the body politic that they are. And that is perhaps the sober reality behind this book, but one that's exceptionally important to understand. Again, I won't go through, it is a spy thriller. This might sound all philosophical and geopolitical. It is a spy thriller. There is action, there is violence and love story and everything you could ask for in a spy thriller here, but the underlying reality of what's going on is so important to get out to other people. And if boring conversations of dry presentations of facts don't do it, then perhaps a book like this will. So please, I really do think it would be worth your time to order a copy, maybe order a couple, give one out as a loaner copy that you can loan out to friends to introduce them to this information. Truly some of the most important information we have, and from an inside source, someone who was there in the Washington field office of the FBI with her hands on some of the documents that reveal some of the truths that are being hinted at in this book. And if you go in with that knowledge, then you will understand the types of things that are being hinted at. So there will be more to say about this book. We will talk about it in more detail later. I'm leaving out the detail of the book now because I'm going to give you a chance to read it first. Please go to thelonegladio.com or boilingfrogspost.com in order to secure your purchase, your copy of the book, or find out more information about the book in general. And once you've done so, join us back here on the Corbett Report, where we will be talking more about this book in the future. That's it for me for today. Thank you again for tuning in. I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the near future.